Now to London, where the Snowden saga is having an effect on the partner of an American journalist who published the leaks revealing the National Security Agency's surveillance programs. On Sunday, English authorities detained 28-year-old David Miranda for 9 hours while he was passing through Heathrow International Airport in London. He was on his way to Rio de Janeiro, where he lives with his partner, Guardian columnist Glenn Greenwald. Here's Miranda describing his detention to the BBC.
I
was kept in a room with 6 agents coming in and out and asking me about everything, my whole life. They took my computer, my video games, my mobile phone and memory cards, everything.
Now, Miranda says authorities told him that he was being questioned under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act of 2000. That is a powerful British law that allows the police to stop and question travelers at UK airports and ports for up to 9 hours in order to determine if they are a potential terrorist. Miranda was traveling through London after a trip to Berlin, where he spent time with Laura Poitras. She is the U.S. filmmaker who worked with Glenn Greenwald on the Snowden stories in the video you're looking at. The Guardian newspaper funded this trip. Now, the White House says the U.S. was not involved in the questioning, but was alerted by British authorities before Miranda was detained. For more on the potential fallouts of this latest episode, I'm joined now by political commentator Sam Sachs. Sam, what is the message, do you think, that British authorities were trying to send here, or is there a message?
Oh, yeah, it's purely intimidation, and I think everybody involved, from Glenn Greenwald to Mr. Miranda to everyone who's written about this issue can see right through it that this was strictly about intimidation. You mentioned the Section 7 of the Terrorist Act here. Most of the people who are detained here, well over 90%, are released very quickly. Almost virtually no one stays more than 7 hours, let alone the maximum 9 hours, which Mr. Miranda was held there. But as unprecedented as this is, I mean, really, journalists know that certain things come with the trade. Laura Poitras, who he was visiting, she gets stopped routinely when she comes back in the United States. Journalists, sort of wear it as a badge of honor, the fact that they have to deal with stuff like this, even though they shouldn't. But targeting a loved one of a journalist is something completely different. I think Glenn Greenwald compared it to mafioso style. But it does fit in with the UK government and the United States government and allies' string of unprecedented tactics, whether it's threatening to invade the Ecuadorian embassy to get Julian Assange, whether it's grounding Evo Morales' plane a few weeks ago. So really, this shows that more and more desperation coming from these governments to try and clamp down on these leaks and journalists who oppose them.
Now, Glenn Greenwald actually did respond to this. He responded in a column to the Guardian saying, quote, "If the UK and US governments believe that tactics like this are going to deter or intimidate us in any way from continuing to report aggressively on what these documents reveal, they are beyond deluded. If anything, it will have only the opposite effect, to embolden us even further." So if this was a form of intimidation, did it work? I mean, obviously, Glenn Greenwald is saying it didn't.
No, and it did, and none of these strategies have worked. Look, the Obama administration has now used the Espionage Act 8 times, I believe, in hopes of frightening other people from doing these same sort of whistleblowing. That has not worked at all. And really, Glenn Greenwald has exposed secrets about the UK government, and now there's going to be more secrets coming out directly because he's exposed the fact that the UK GCHQ is tapping into basically all the fiber optic cables around the world and collecting information. He exposed that GCHQ, working with the NSA, was creating a fake internet cafe to lure diplomats who were there for the G8 in 2010. So look, the British government's going to probably be dealing with a lot more stuff now as a result of them doing this.
Do you think it's a fair argument to say that the British government is exposing itself by doing this?
Yeah, I'd say so. And really, and the United States government is in the same boat. I mean, every response they've had to these leaks has shown that they have no credibility. And the leaks are being timed now. Edward Snowden's leaks are being timed so that once the administration responds to one leak, they release another leak showing that the administration hasn't exactly been truthful.
So what hand, since we're speaking about the U.S., has the U.S. played in it? As I mentioned in my intro, obviously the British government informed the U.S. before they even detained him. So does that indicate that the U.S. is in fact playing a role?
I don't know how much of a direct role the United States, but really I don't think it's that important to make a distinction between the UK and the US government when it comes to this issue. What these leaks have revealed is a global security surveillance apparatus. We've learned from these leaks that it's the NSA working very closely with GCHQ. So it's not just these isolated intelligence agencies that individual governments are trying to protect their own intelligence agencies. We're talking of a global internet or global intelligence surveillance apparatus with the United States, the British government, the German government, all working together. So really, when it comes to who's detaining them, it's this entity.
And obviously, this is a very scary notion for journalists around the world. Can you talk about some of the implications for journalists and journalism in general?
Sure. Well, practically, journalists know going through Heathrow or going through other airports in London, they have to worry about what they're going to carry on them. I mean, Mr. Miranda had documents, he had electronics all seized from him, so journalists, when they're traveling, have to consider that. Plus, it really validates this fear that journalists have had for several years that anti-terror legislation is going to be used against them. This was anti-terror legislation being used against an associate of a journalist. Here in the United States, we've had the National Defense Authorization Act's indefinite detention provision, which journalists have said can be used against journalists who are coordinating with people, anybody who might be, quote, an affiliated terrorist. You know, the government has said, well, this isn't the point of it. But now that we see these laws being used to target journalists, this could have serious implications.
And we have seen and heard a lot of those people come here on RT, people like Chris Hedges, saying that this will be, in fact, used against journalists. And an important thing to note, I think, is that Miranda told the BBC that he was not asked a single question about terrorism, but rather about what The Guardian was doing in terms of NSA stories. So talk about the international fallout here.
Well, this is along, I mentioned earlier, the grounding of Evo Morales' plane, the threatening to invade the Ecuadorian embassy. These are all actions that are being taken by Western governments against South American governments. And we saw anger at reaction to the threats to storm the Ecuadorian embassy. We saw even more anger and even action taken against diplomats when Evo Morales' plane was grounded. We've seen Brazil release a statement showing grave concern over this. Look, South America is not nearly as dependent economically on the United States and West anymore. And that gives them more opportunity to stand up and defend themselves when things like this happen.
RT political commentator Sam Sachs, thank you so much for weighing in on this.
Thanks.